Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1882 when the wind still carried the bite of snowmelt and everything quiet could be heard for miles. Hudson Hart had no plans to stop by that creek. He was only trailing a runaway calf, the younger of his two boys, Ridge, riding behind him on a small chestnut pony. But when he saw the torn hem of a dress snagged in the willows and the pale bit of skin just past it, he pulled his horse to a dead halt. "Pa?" Ridge asked, squinting ahead. Hudson held up a hand, then slowly dismounted. His boots hit the damp earth with a soft thud, his eyes locked on the figure crouched beside the water. She was barefoot, her dress soaked to the knees, long dark hair tangled down her back. She was not moving. "Miss," Hudson called gently, stepping closer. "Are you hurt?" She turned slowly, blinking like sunlight hurt her eyes. There was a cut across her cheek and dried blood on her temple. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked lost, not just in place but in time, in thought, in everything. Hudson crouched a few feet away. "My name's Hudson Hart. This here's my boy, Ridge. We're not gonna hurt you." She looked at Ridge wide-eyed, dirt-streaked, and then back at Hudson, like she was trying to decide if either of them were real. "I do not know where I am," she whispered hoarsely. "I do not know who I am." Hudson's heart thudded, slow and steady. He had seen grief and he had seen fear, but this was something else. This was someone who had been broken apart. "You're safe now," he said. "We'll get you warm and fed, all right. You can rest at our ranch until we figure things out." She nodded once. Just once. It was all she seemed to have left in her. Her name, she remembered 3 days later, was Norah Bellamy. She said it softly in the kitchen while holding a mug of warmed milk, staring into the fire. Hudson had been carrying in wood. He froze when he heard it. "Norah," he said, as if feeling the shape of it. "That sounds right." She gave a small, tired nod. "I do not remember anything before the creek, just pieces, trees, a storm, horses running." Hudson leaned against the wall, arms folded. "That's all right. You do not need to remember all at once." Ridge, who had taken to sitting close to her every evening, leaned over and held her hand. "You can stay here," he said softly. "You do not gotta leave." "Ridge," Hudson warned gently. But Norah squeezed the boy's hand, and her eyes filled with tears. "I do not have anywhere else," she said. Norah stayed. She swept the porch every morning, helped cook when she could, and sat with Hudson's younger son, Rowan, when he had fevered dreams and needed soft humming to fall asleep. The boys had taken to her like they had always known her, like she had always been part of their home. Hudson watched her quietly. He had lost his wife, Clara, 5 years before. The boys had been too small to understand it fully then, but Hudson had carried that loss every day since. He had not looked for someone new, had not wanted to, but Norah was not someone he had gone looking for. She was someone he had found. And when he watched her in the mornings, standing barefoot on the porch with her hair braided and the sun catching the curve of her cheek, he felt something he thought had died inside him start to stir. Not just want, not just warmth, but the deep, aching sense that something had finally come home. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed and the wind was sharp with the scent of pine, Norah stepped out onto the porch where Hudson sat sharpening a blade. "Do you think I was running from something?" she asked. Hudson looked up. "Maybe. Or maybe you were just trying to survive." Norah crossed her arms tight over her chest. "I feel like I lost something important, like a part of me is still out there in those woods." Hudson set the blade down gently and stood. He had always been a man of few words, but he stepped closer now, close enough to see the faint freckles across her nose. "You have not lost everything," he said quietly. "You're here, you're safe. And whatever broke, you did not finish the job." Norah's eyes locked on his. And for the first time, he saw the flicker of a fight coming back to her. "I feel like I belong here," she whispered. "With the boys, with you, even if I do not remember why." Hudson reached out and cupped her cheek, thumb brushing just beneath her eye. He had not touched a woman like that in years, but it felt right. "You do belong here," he said. She closed her eyes and leaned into his hand. And that night, while the fire burned low and the boys slept with the windows open to the night wind, Hudson sat beside her on the floor of the front room, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and not a single word needed to be said. She had come from the woods with nothing, not even her name. But now she had the start of something whole, and Hudson knew without question that the missing piece of home had found its way back. Norah waited until the house was quiet, then stepped out into the barn. The lantern in her hand threw a low halo of gold light across the packed dirt floor. A colt stirred in its stall, the soft rustle of hay and breath filling the space. She moved slowly, careful not to wake the boy's pony or the heifer tucked in the far corner. She hadn't told Hudson, but the night sounds had started waking her again, rusted hinges swinging, thunder she couldn't see. She didn't cry out, didn't shake. Just sat up, rigid under the quilt, breath caught in her throat like it belonged to someone else. Tonight she'd come out here instead. She brushed her hand along the mare's shoulder and leaned against the stall gate, grounding herself in the animal's warmth. The air smelled of oats and old leather. "You always come out this quiet?" Hudson's voice came from the open barn door, low and even. He stepped inside with a coat shrugged over his undershirt, hair tousled from sleep. Norah didn't turn. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He came closer, keeping his steps slow. "I check the latch on the corral every night, habit." Norah glanced toward him. "It's not the latch bringing you out here." Hudson ran a hand over his jaw and leaned on the beam across from her. "No, it ain't." They stood in the dim light, the mare shifting between them. Norah traced the line of the horse's mane with trembling fingers. "Sometimes," she said after a while, "I get the feeling I was waiting to be found, not just lost." Hudson didn't speak right away. The mare's tail flicked once and the barn settled deeper into its hush. "You don't have to explain anything to me," he said. "Not till you're ready." "If ever." Norah looked at him, eyes steady now. "But I want to. I remembered something yesterday." Hudson straightened a little but didn't crowd her. "There was a man," she said. "I think he was following me. I don't see his face, just the sound of his boots, hard steps. Always behind me." Hudson's jaw set, but his voice stayed even. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I remember running. I had a satchel. It had letters in it. I lost it before the creek." Hudson nodded once. "We'll ride out tomorrow. See if it's still near where I found you." Her throat tightened. "I'm scared of what might be in those letters. Then we'll read them together." Norah pressed her palm flat to the mare's side, grounding herself again. The animal breathed steady beneath her hand. "I never knew kindness could feel like this," she whispered. Hudson looked at her then, eyes soft but sure. "It ain't kindness, it's just truth. You're here, Norah, and you matter." He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. She stepped forward on her own, closing the space between them with quiet certainty. Her hand found his, rough and warm. He looked down at their joined hands, then back into her face. "I don't know what I'll find out there," she said. "You won't face it alone," he replied. Outside, the roosters were still asleep, but a cool breeze had started to stir the grass. Norah looked toward the opening of the barn where the dark sky bled slowly into blue. "Tomorrow, then," she said. Hudson nodded. "Tomorrow." And they stood there, hand in hand, while the first light of morning gathered over the hills. The trail back to the creek was quieter than Hudson remembered. No birdsong, no wind pressing through the cottonwoods. Just the slow crunch of hooves over soft earth and the occasional creak of leather. Ridge and Rowan were left with their Aunt Mabel in town, the only person Hudson trusted with them besides Norah. He'd saddled the gelding for her, a sure-footed roan with a gentle gait, and they rode side by side through the morning haze. Norah kept her eyes ahead, her jaw set. She hadn't spoken since they passed the last fence line. Hudson glanced over. "You all right to keep going?" She nodded once. "I want to see it." They rode on until the trees thickened and the ground grew uneven. Hudson dismounted first and offered his hand. Norah took it, sliding down with more ease than she'd shown weeks before. Her boots sank slightly into the damp moss as she stepped ahead. She stopped at the place the willows bent low to the water. Hudson watched her from behind, hands resting on his belt. She crouched, fingers brushing the soil like she was searching for something invisible. Then she rose and moved upstream, past the boulders slick with lichen. It was Norah who found the satchel, wedged between two fallen logs half buried in mud, the leather stiff from weather. Her breath caught, but she didn't hesitate. She pulled it free, fingers trembling only slightly. Hudson came to her side but didn't reach for it. She opened the flap and drew out two folded sheets, edges curled and stained. The ink had bled in places, but the names were still legible. Norah Bellamy, she read aloud, voice thin, Missouri Pacific Line, eastbound to Topeka. She looked up at Hudson. I was headed west, she said. But I started farther east than here. What else is in there? She reached in again and pulled out a second paper. Her eyes moved over it in silence. Then she passed it to him. It was a marriage license, issued in St. Louis, never signed. The groom's name was Isaac Travers. Hudson folded it once and slipped it back into the satchel. You were leaving him, he said. I think he followed me, she replied, her voice flat. I think he didn't like that I ran. Hudson stared at the creek for a long moment. You don't owe him a thing. I don't even remember his face, she whispered, but I remember being afraid of it. The satchel hung from her hand like weight she wasn't ready to drop. Hudson took it gently and slung it over his shoulder. We'll bring it back with us, he said. But it don't have to mean anything you don't want it to. She nodded, eyes on the water. I'm not that woman anymore, he stepped closer. Who are you now? She turned to him and the sun caught in her eyes. I'm someone who wants to stay, she said. Not because I'm lost. Because I've found something that feels like mine. Hudson didn't speak. He reached for her hand, rough palm closing around her fingers. She let out a breath, long and steady. On the ride back, she rode closer beside him, not speaking. Just steady, like the space between them had settled into something sure. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was high and the wind had picked up again, tugging at the brim of Hudson's hat. Norah looked toward the house, then to him. You built all this alone, he shook his head. Me and Clara, then me and the boys. She studied the porch, the smoke curling from the chimney, the clothesline flapping in the distance. Do you think there's room for someone else? She asked. Hudson turned to her, voice quiet. There already is. She looked toward the barn, then the corral, then finally back to him. I'd like to help make something here, she said. Not just stay in it. Hudson reached across the space between their horses and touched her wrist, warm and solid. Then we'll build it together. And she nodded, not with hesitation but with certainty. The past was still out there in muddy paper and forgotten tracks, but her place was here now and it was one she'd chosen. The first rain of June came down hard and sudden, beating against the windows with a rhythm that filled the house like a slow drum. Hudson stood at the edge of the porch, arms braced on the railing, watching the water churn the packed dirt into dark rivulets. Behind him, the boys were busy near the hearth, Rowan trying to stitch a hole in his sock while Ridge whittled something small and shapeless. Norah had taken to the pantry, checking the jars for signs of spoil. A quiet task, but she moved with a touch of urgency as though keeping her hands busy might anchor the rest of her. When Hudson came back inside, his boots heavy with mud, she turned and met his eyes with something unreadable. I should earn my keep, she said, not just in cooking and tending. I want to help with the accounts or the livestock records. Hudson set his hat on the peg beside the door. You know figures? I worked a ledger in Missouri, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Before everything changed, I remember that now, he nodded, thoughtful. You can take over the books if that's what you want. The last few months have been nothing but scribbles and guesswork. She gave the faintest curve of a smile, the kind that didn't touch her eyes. Then I'll bring some order to it. Hudson crossed to the table and pulled out the old binder, worn at the spine, the paper inside yellowed and smudged. He watched her thumb through the pages, her brows drawing tight as she scanned the columns. You've been undercounting your hay stores, she said without looking up. By at least 10 bales a cycle. Hudson leaned a hip against the table. Well, I'll be. She didn't laugh. Her gaze lingered on the numbers. It's strange what the mind keeps and what it lets go. He folded his arms. It'll come back in pieces. You don't have to chase it. Norah set the binder down and looked at him, something shifting in her expression. What if what comes back isn't good? Then we face it, he said. But it don't change what's already here. She stepped away from the table and crossed to the window, watching the rain spill down the glass. Her reflection was faint, almost ghost-like in the pain. I used to be someone who didn't ask for help, she said. Someone proud. Maybe too proud. Hudson moved beside her, not touching, just close enough to be felt. You don't seem proud to me, he said. You seem brave. She turned her face toward him. I don't want to be afraid of myself. You ain't, he said. Not really. You're just learning who you are now. The rain softened, the sound thinning to a steady patter. Ridge called out suddenly from the hearth, holding up a scrap of wood. It's a dog, he said. Rowan frowned. Looks more like a cow. Norah smiled then, faint but true. Whatever it is, it's yours, she said. Hudson watched her walk over and kneel beside the boys, offering them both a gentle word, her hands brushing their hair back from their faces. The ease of it, the quiet care, it wasn't something taught, it was something remembered in the bones. Later, when the rain had stopped and the air smelled of wet sage and wood smoke, Norah found Hudson in the barn loft, checking the grain sacks. She climbed the ladder without a word, settled beside him on the floor, and pulled her knees to her chest. Do you ever miss her? She asked, not looking at him. He didn't pretend not to know who she meant. Yes, she nodded slowly. I think he asked me to marry him because I was easy to move, easy to quiet. Hudson didn't speak, letting the silence stretch between them. I don't want to be easy anymore, she said. I want to be known, even if it's messy. He turned toward her, the dust of the loft catching in the last light of day. Then let me know you. Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. I want to. They sat there until the shadows grew long and the air cooled against their skin. No declarations passed between them, no promises. Just the steady hum of presence and the slow burn of trust being built, one quiet hour at a time. Norah stood barefoot in the kitchen, hands dusted with flour, her braid falling loose against her shoulder as she rolled dough for a blackberry cobbler. The berries had been foraged early that morning, tucked into Ridge's hat after he and Rowan returned from the western ridge with sunburned noses and mountain dust on their boots. Hudson leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the way her fingers moved with quiet precision. She hadn't asked for help, didn't need to. The boys were out in the field with Aunt Mabel, who had stayed longer than planned after the rains softened the road east. Norah's sleeves were rolled high and her eyes were focused but not distant. She didn't drift anymore. You always this serious about dessert? Hudson asked. Norah didn't look up. Only when it's going to be eaten before it cools. He stepped into the room, the floor creaking under his boots. You mackin' that a challenge? Her eyes flicked up then. Just a truth. He reached for the tin of clean forks on the shelf, setting two on the table. Boys'll be back in an hour. We could pretend we didn't know it was ready yet. She smiled slowly, but her voice stayed even. You're not above stealing cobbler for the right cause, he said. Yeah. She slid the dish into the oven and closed the door, wiping her hands on a cloth. And what cause is that? Hudson studied her for a long moment. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full. Norah turned toward him, leaning her hip against the counter. I've been thinking, she said, about staying, not just for now, not just while I'm still remembering. He took a step closer. You've already stayed. I want to be part of what's growing here, she said. Not a guest, not a shadow. Hudson's gaze didn't waver. Then stay as my partner, her breath caught. I mean build this with me, raise the boys, plant things that'll outlast us both. His voice was steady. Grow old here if you want to. I don't have a ring, he added. And I reckon I don't need one to know what I want. Norah reached for his hand, fingers firm around his. I've lived half my life not knowing what I needed. But I know now. He pulled her gently toward him, arms around her waist, and her head found his chest like it had been there 100 times before. The weight of old fears had lifted, not all at once, but piece by piece, until only the truth remained. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass and the sun broke over the ridge. Norah lifted her face, eyes bright. "I want to marry you," she said, not softly, not hesitantly. "Not because I need a place to land, but because I've never felt more steady than I do with you." Hudson kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask questions, only answered them. Later, the boys burst through the door, voices loud and boots muddy. Ridge stopped short, sniffing the air. "You said we had to wait," he shouted, pointing at the half-eaten cobbler on the table. Norah wiped her mouth with a napkin. "We were making sure it wasn't poisoned." Rowan narrowed his eyes. "That's not fair." Hudson ruffled his hair. "Life rarely is." They all sat down together, the boys piling their plates high, Norah leaning into Hudson's side as he poured her coffee. The room was warm with laughter and wood smoke, the windows thrown open to let in the smell of summer. They married 3 weeks later beneath the cottonwoods, with Mabel sewing new shirts for the boys and Reverend Byers hitching his mule all the way from town. Norah wore a pale blue dress she'd let out herself, and Hudson stood in his Sunday coat, his hands steady as he took hers. There were no grand speeches, just vows spoken low and sure like everything else between them. The ranch changed with her hand and its fences mended quicker, books kept lean and clean, wildflowers planted along the path to the barn. The boys grew like weeds, sun-browned and strong, and Norah taught them how to read the sky and bake bread without measuring cups. Hudson, once a man who kept his grief folded tight like an old letter, found himself laughing more, sitting longer at the table after supper, reaching for her hand without needing a reason. And Norah, who had come from the woods with no name and no past she could hold, found she didn't need to look back anymore. She had everything she needed in the sound of the door swinging open at dusk, in the weight of Hudson's arm around her waist at night, in the 2 boys who called her Ma without having to be asked. Together, they built something that didn't need mending, and it held.